Gormagos Ceann Comhairle. I understand the session is about violence against women in Ireland, but I think we have to acknowledge that this is a worldwide experience. UN stats show us that 1 in 3 women worldwide experience some sort of sexual or physical violence, mostly, again, in line with the stats here, by an intimate partner. Fewer than 40% of women who experience violence seek help of any sort, and 42% of women experience intimate partner violence and report an injury as a consequence of that violence. And that's the parameters in which we're having this debate today. Tomorrow is the anniversary of Oireachtas Saoirn Dorj, and I hope I have pronounced that noble woman's name right, a migrant worker from Mongolia who lost her life on her way home from work, a cleaner in a bank, a mother of 2. And I think it's worth mentioning her name here today. I also went into it this morning, but the details around the lack of spaces in refuges, but also the housing crisis itself. There are many forms of violence against women, and the lack of housing, homelessness, is also a form of state violence against women. And indeed, there's something like 40% of women who are in homeless accommodation have suffered physical abuse. And we have to ask ourselves, if that's a global figure, if that's a global picture, why is it happening? And I just want to quickly say that I believe that this is rooted in the system of profit, the system that for generations, for hundreds of years, has insisted and set the demarcation in society that women stay at home, they breed the children, then they rear them, they do all the caring work, and then they stay at home making sure that those children are socialised, fed and ready to become the next generation of workers. And that is what has put women for thousands of years into the dark without being recognised as unique human beings. And I want to quote from a journalist called Fiona Vera Gray in The Guardian, where she says, "We live in a world where women's humanity is constantly undermined, where what we look like is more important than what we do, and where what is done to us is more important than who we are. Research on men's sexual aggression has shown that the denial of women's human uniqueness is a driving factor for some men who commit violent and sexual offences." And I think for that reason, I really want to push the question of education and non-ethos-based sex education in our schools. It must be of that nature. Otherwise, we're not going to rear a generation of men and boys, and indeed girls, who understand that uniqueness of human beings. There's also then the question of why it is that women's bodies, women's shapes, women's images are used to make vast amount of money. The pornographic industry is one of the most lucrative businesses on the planet. And indeed, there's a fact here that was published recently that the traffic of those accessing porn on the internet, and it has to be said that increasingly pornography on the internet involving women is more and more violent and more deadly in certain circumstances. But the traffic of that access from sites that stream it is more per month than Netflix, Amazon and Twitter combined. That is a startling statistic and reflects so badly on the world we live in, a world which does undermine women's humanity. So the question of culture is a big part of it here, and non-consent of women as seen by some as titillating, as attractive, as a barrier to be overcome, as a challenge. Coercion is often seen as being sexy, and the brutality of that cannot be overstated. So we won't just change the minds of men by talking about it, we change it by starting at root and branch causes of it. I'd like to finish finally on the role of this House, because you can't exonerate the past government for failure in this area. And it was mentioned in the newspapers this week, and I myself mentioned it several times in the last all. What has happened with the second Savvy report? Your predecessor, Frances Fitzgerald, answered me in November 2017 when I asked her can she lean on the Taoiseach to spend the money to produce the second Savvy report, and she said, "We need macro information on sexual and domestic violence in this country." The matter was discussed at Cabinet today. The initial scoping has begun to determine how precisely that can be carried out. That's 5 years ago almost. And the report itself is almost 18 years, or almost 20 years overdue. So how does your side of the House explain the inadequacies in dealing with this problem if you can't even produce a report?